Hey, Legal Rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do.
In this episode, I interview Sateesh Nori, professor at NYU and legal innovation strategist at JustTech, whose 20-year journey from housing court advocate to AI pioneer is transforming legal access for all. Welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. I'm your host, Tom Martin, and I'm really honored today to have Sateesh Nori on. He is an adjunct professor at NYU. He's also a legal innovation strategist at JustTech, and he has a lot going on. He's also been traveling quite a bit lately, and I'm honored to have him on my podcast. He's been on quite a few podcasts lately, and I think he's really a treasure that you need to learn more about. So, with that intro, Sateesh, if you could just tell us a little bit about what you're up to now.
Thank you, Tom. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I would bet that you have more frequent flyer miles than I do. But I do have been traveling a lot. So, yeah, I'm a lawyer. I'm a legal services lawyer. That's my primary professional identity for the last 22 years, basically since the day I graduated from law school. I've been a legal services attorney. And the reason for that is I wanted to help people. I wanted to do what I consider to be human rights work. And I wanted to cross that type of work with actual court experience, being in court, because that's what people think of when they imagine what a lawyer does all day long. That's what I thought of when I was a kid. And I thought, what would be a cool job to have when I grow up? And going to court and, wearing a tie and speaking up and making arguments. I always thought that would be really interesting and really challenging and really fun. And to be able to stand up for the little guy, the To Kill a Mockingbird type lawyer. Like, who doesn't want to do that? Who wouldn't want that opportunity to right the wrongs and to fight for justice? So that's what I did for a long time. But being a lawyer is hard. It's really frustrating. You really do a lot of tedious, repetitive, boring work, even if you're lucky and you have a job in which you represent people and you get to go to court. More than half of the work is still pretty dry, pretty dull. And I always thought there's got to be a better way to do this. And I know you probably felt the same way when you started LawDroid, what, 8, 9 years ago? Is that right? And
It's coming up on
so
9. Yeah.
yeah. So, what is that better way? How do we do the stuff that we need to do and get rid of the stuff that we don't need to do, or it's not the best use of our time to do it? And that led me on a path towards meeting people like you and figuring out that there are ways to focus on the hard stuff and get rid of the easy stuff. And when AI hit and I started seeing demos, it was like a religious conversion for me. I felt like I was struck by lightning on a battlefield fighting, the infidel or whatever it is, and realized like we can't go back to the way that we've been doing things. And it's going to be hard. People are going to drag their feet. People are going to be resistant to change, but it's going to be inevitable. And I wanted to be early. I wanted to be a proselytizer. I wanted to be a hype man for this stuff. And so that's what I've been for the last 2 years or so. And it's been really rewarding to see what's possible and to get a window into the future of legal practice, which is going to be better for everyone except maybe the lawyers. And there may be fewer of us, and we may be culled. But, I sometimes joke that I didn't become a lawyer to work with other lawyers. I don't like lawyers. They're not the most fun people to hang around with. But I went to law school to try to help solve problems for ordinary folks. And this is the way. I think this is the way forward.
I like that. This is the way. Like the Mandalorian.
Any Star Wars references I can throw in, I'll be happy to do it.
Well, thank you so much for summarizing it and framing it like that, because, I really admire people that are in it for the right reasons, that, want to be helping people, and that this is a force, multiplier for that.
Mm.
But I also want to get back to that maybe later in our talk, and right now just kind of go back to the beginning, because you didn't come from nowhere. Like, none of us come from nowhere. We all
Mhm.
have, a village that helped raise us. And so I'm curious for you, like, I know you're in New York City now. Like, did you grow up in New York City? Like, what's your
Yeah,
what's your story?
it's an interesting story, but not that uncommon. So I'm the child of immigrants from India. In fact, I was born in India, and my dad left my mom and I when I was 3 months old to come to America to start a medical career. And he spent some time here, worked in a few hospitals before he got his first big break. And then my mom and I came over maybe a year later, and we lived in a hospital subsidized apartment as both my parents started their medical careers. And then my sister was born in the same hospital that my parents worked in, and in fact, my kids were born in that hospital decades
Wow.
later. And so we have this connection to this particular place. And then we moved to the suburbs, and I led a pretty normal upper middle class life. Not sure what I would do, but I was on the debate team as young as probably seventh grade, and did competitive debate, policy debate, if you're familiar with it. Some of the listeners might be. We carried around tubs and tubs of physical evidence and boarded planes and trains and buses with like 8 Rubbermaid tubs full of paper. These days, they have it all on their iPads and their phones. And we would go to tournaments. And then in the summer, every summer from seventh grade through 11th grade, I went to debate camp in the summers. I went to American University a few times, and then Dartmouth um, for like 5 or 6 weeks in the summer to study like oral argument and evidence. And it was basically like a mini law school. And then we would come back together in the fall and go to tournaments all across the country, like we were, a Division I basketball team at Duke or something like that. And we would debate these other, nerds basically. And all of them probably ended up in law school, or they're law professors or something like that at this point. But that was my introduction to the kind of thrill of argument and presentation and oral advocacy and issues and logic and all of these things that probably I would never have learned otherwise. And it gave me a heads up, a head start in college. It allowed me to be a better writer, better speaker. It basically took away any stage fright that I might have had otherwise, because I got over that when I was 13, speaking in front of like auditoriums of people. And then I knew I wanted to go to law school. And I only wish law school was as interesting as debate was, and more as fun as it was. But in law school, I thought, okay, let's study human rights. And being born in India, I always had this nagging pull of, to find my roots, to identify what other life I might have had if my parents hadn't come to America. What's the other self that I have, that would have remained in India barefoot, riding a bicycle to a local school, getting a local public college degree, maybe being an engineer on like a public works project or like a local administrative official. What would that path have been like? So I was always curious. And not to mention, I had, hundreds and hundreds of relatives still back in India who I didn't really know at all, including my grandparents, my grandmothers, um, my uncles and aunts, my cousins, people who kind of look like me, but we had nothing else in common. So I went to India in law school to work on human rights issues and lived there for a summer and thought, okay, this is another path that could connect me and help me understand who I am and where I come from. But when I got back to America, I thought, okay, do I want to live in India? Do I want to be far away from my family, my immediate family?
Mm,
Am I really an American or am I an Indian? Um, and I realized, yeah, I'm pretty American. Like it's hard to wash that off in
yeah.
the River Ganges. Um, so I thought, okay, what's my next step? What are the things that I like to do? And as late as, the summer after graduating from law school, I thought, I'm going to be a public school teacher. I'm going to be like a Teach for America type teacher, but in New York City, they call it teaching fellows. So you work in a public school in a low income area, and you teach, eighth grade or ninth grade, and you get your master's degree while you do it. And I thought that would be a way to give back. But long story short, I had to either take the bar exam or take the teacher certification exam. And so I chose the bar exam, thinking I'll never have a better chance of passing it other than right after law school, which you don't really need law school to pass the bar exam, I guess. You can just take the bar exam course, which a lot of people do. And so I ended up taking the bar exam and then looking for jobs. And I found a job at Legal Aid in Brooklyn and representing tenants. And I knew almost nothing about this topic, except that I was a tenant in New York City. And 22 years have gone by, and I've been totally immersed in that field.
Wow.
And I kind of took to it. So you never know what's going to happen or what opportunity will really seize you when you're looking to seize other opportunities. And then here I am today talking about AI. So it's a really difficult path to describe or plan out in advance.
When you were growing up, it sounds like you definitely had an influence in debating, and so like that kind of argument, I could definitely see how that would go towards like a law towards law school. That it sounds like from an early age, and everyone has different like experiences. I, for one, I wasn't involved early on with like law school type stuff, but besides that experience with debate, were I mean, your parents very industrious, very smart people, working in the medical profession. What it sounds like you would get from them that kind of entrepreneurial mentality that you can go into a new country, you could start a new career, like that force of will was something that sounds like it was an early influence. What other kinds of early influences did you get from them, or maybe from other people that you met when you're growing up?
Yeah, when I was really young, my grandfather got sick. He was in India, and it turned out he had lung cancer, but he was misdiagnosed and lost kind of years of time in which he could have been treated. And so he came to America, and my father is actually a cancer specialist. So my grandfather came to live with us, but apparently it was already almost too late at that point. So despite their best efforts, he didn't make it. But during those last months, he was living with us in our home in Westchester suburbs. And he was in my room, and I was sleeping on the couch. He was there with my grandmother, and he had an oxygen tank. And near the end, it was really difficult for him to eat or drink, but he wanted to connect with me. And my sister was just a baby, so she wasn't really able to communicate with him. And so we would play chess to pass the time. And it was something that at the time I really didn't want to do, but my parents said, go spend time with your grandfather.
Yeah.
Um, thinking like this time is really precious. So we would play chess, and he would kind of give me some life advice. And one time he said to me, you should be a lawyer. You have that kind of brain, and you seem to be, watching and listening to what everybody's saying, and you're always thinking about, what's the response to that or the counterpoint to that. And I said, oh, okay, I don't even know what that is. I'm 7, but it kind of stuck with me that this old man I didn't really know well was watching me too. And even to this day, my mom tells me that I'm exactly like him, even though I didn't really get to know him that well. And so I look for, things he's written, or I listen for stories about him from other people when I go to India. So that was really early influence on me because, as you can imagine, my parents wanted me to be a medical doctor like they are.
I
And my sister
was going to
actually
ask you
is a
about
medical
that.
doctor now too. Yeah, my sister is a doctor. My brother-in-law is a doctor. Many of my cousins are. We could open a hospital. Is the joke when we get together for like Thanksgiving or something. And I'm the one who's like a lawyer, and it's hard to explain what I do. And particularly being a legal services lawyer is even harder to explain. Like, why would you be a lawyer and not make a lot of money? And why would you be a lawyer and help people um, who, are either in trouble or either don't have enough money, and sometimes there's judgment there too. Like, everyone, we made it. Why couldn't other people make it? And the immigrant, model minority myth and issues like that come up. So it's hard to explain, but those early influences of, my grandfather, and then realizing that I like this stuff and it's exciting, and then taking to debate and realizing there's a community of people just like me. The presentation, the theater of it, there is this kind of glamorous side of law that you see on TV and in movies a lot.
Yeah.
Everyone thinks it's like Suits, right? And it's hardly ever like that. But there are some times when you're like, hey, that was kind of like a TV show, like what just happened to me and my client in front of this, crazy judge today in housing court. Um, and there is that excitement, that responsibility that you feel. So I was really drawn to that.
That's a wonderful story, by the way. Um, what a great influence to have from your grandfather. So if we fast forward from that to university, you're a poli-sci major, right?
That's right. Yeah.
What was that experience like?
Yeah, so for a little while, I thought I'd go into politics. Like people tell you, hey, you're a good speaker, and you can actually do something positive, and this is a career path. You should go into politics. And so I thought, okay, maybe that's what I'll do, and at least let me study politics. And I went to college in Baltimore, which was very close to Washington, D.C. So I
Hmm.
was very much drawn to the power of Washington, and the elected officials and the lawyers and the lobbyists, and the grand halls of Congress. And I spent a lot of time um, taking classes or interning in Washington, D.C. And I had a lot of friends who ended up living in Washington, D.C. And it's intoxicating to being part of that whole world of government and policy. And so I thought, okay, let me delve into the political world. And so after college, before going to law school, I moved to California, and I lived in a garage in Long Beach that belonged to a guy who was running for Congress. And I was his sole campaign staffer. And so I was I was looking for somebody who was an Indian American person who was seeking to be the first Indian American congressional representative at the federal level. And this was one of those people. So I called him up and I said, hey, can I come work with you? And he said, sure. I don't have any money to pay you. And I said, okay, can I stay with you? And he said, okay. So for a little while, I stayed in his garage, which was just a storeroom. It was like a California bungalow in Long Beach, California.
Right.
And the garage is just a bungalow full of like, boxes and an old bike and a motorcycle and stuff like that. And a bunch of rats or raccoons, who knows, but they were up at night. And then I found a cheap apartment and worked on his campaign, um, only to realize that we had no chance of winning. But we
Mm.
were challenging a fellow Democrat who was an incumbent. So, all of that's not good. And, but one of the things that was really interesting and funny is that we had a campaign bus. We bought an old school bus and we painted it with his name, um, Matthews 1998, on the side in big letters. And I drove that bus around. That was also my primary mode of transportation. And it was like a short bus, the long bus and the short bus. It was a short bus. So I was, more capable of driving it. But, I would drive to, the grocery store in the bus, and I would go get pizza on the bus. Um, and the steering fluid would give out because it was leaking, so I'd have to pull over and take out a jug of like gas station steering fluid and pour it into the reservoir so that I could turn the wheels for another couple of miles until the steering fluid leaked out again. So that's what I did for a while. Then I realized, okay, um, politics is a tough business, and there's a saying about politics which stuck with me, which is like politics is showbiz for people who have no other talent. And
Hmm.
that was so true with so many people whom I met. They were just kind of self-aggrandizing egotists who wanted to stand in front of a group of people and talk. And if they could sing or do magic tricks, they would do that. Or if they could get a pilot on TV, they would do that. But this was another way to get attention and say the things they thought people wanted to hear. And, that's still true about politics in many ways. There's a lot of people like that. So I grew disillusioned and I thought, where do disillusioned people go? They go to law school.
That's
There's a
funny.
line in The Simpsons where one of the characters says, "I don't believe in anything anymore. I'm going to law school." And that's how I felt. And so I ended up going to law school and like resuming that path after that interruption. But in my mind, I thought, we'd win and I'd be, a 25-year-old congressional chief of staff, and that would be my career, and I'd, work my way up the ranks like a George Stephanopoulos or somebody like that
Yeah.
who picked the right candidate early on and rode it all the way, as far as they could go. That didn't happen, and that's rare.
It's funny, like, well, we've known each other for what, 3 or 4 years now,
Yeah.
somewhere around there. And we hadn't talked about that before, but I did, I lived in Long Beach before I moved up to Vancouver.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
we didn't talk about that, but it's Peter Matthews, right?
It is.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Peter,
Yeah.
yeah, Peter Matthews, he was challenging Alan Lowenthal, right?
Yeah. He challenged a lot of people.
Yeah. No, I remember him. That's so funny. Like we were in the same place at the same
That's
time.
funny.
Just
Amazing. Yeah. And then
yeah.
there's that strip that's what is it, like First Street or Third Street or some Sixth Street? There are all the bars and restaurants
Yeah.
closer to Orange County. And so
Yeah.
there's we spent a lot of time there campaigning and handing out stuff. And there was a place called Hamburger Henry's. And so for a little while, I also volunteered on Hamburger Henry's city council race,
Oh
just to
wow.
like get some more experience through a local political consultant. But it's an interesting place to live, Long Beach. People are
Yeah.
really nice. But again, I didn't have a car. I only had that bus. So really hard to have a social life or to
Right.
go do anything
Well,
because
that
people
sounds,
just don't get it.
I could see like each of those different like steps were like lessons in terms of like the direction, right? And so, at a young age, having that experience with debate, then trying trying politics in that way, and then coming back to law school, and then from law school, like so now we step forward to going to work, um, for legal assistance for housing for people that are like in dire straits. I mean, for them, when they come to you, they're in a panic situation. Like
Mhm.
probably they've gotten an eviction notice, right? And they're like, where are we going to live? Like, and you did that for 20 years?
I did it for 20 years, yeah.
Wow.
But there were like, intermediate steps. I did 5 years as a staff attorney. Then I moved to Harlem to work with tenant associations, like groups of people. So that was a little different. Then I became a supervisor back in Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn.
Mm.
So that was a new experience managing a team of people. And then I ran a whole office in Queens for 9.5 years, where I was in charge of, all the practice areas, like 12 or 13 practice areas. And I got a sense of what it's like to be a senior manager in a nonprofit and really like, learn about hiring people and the personalities and, things like office space and printers and union issues, all of these
Yeah.
things came up. So breaking it up like that, it makes it seem much, it doesn't seem like 20 years in my mind, but putting it all together, it's amazing that it's been that long.
And he actually wrote a book about it, right?
I did. It's called Sheltered 20 Years in Housing Court. And what I tried to do is explain what I learned from my clients, because one of the things about my life that I kind of realized, and I thought about this a lot during the pandemic when we were all working from home, people were getting sick around us, it seemed like international. You start thinking, like, what's it all about? What does it all mean? What am I doing? What have I done? And then I thought about, being an outsider and kind of interloping into this area in, into which I had no business being. Like, what right do I have to talk about housing? I've never been homeless. I've never faced eviction. I've never been low income or struggled paycheck to paycheck. I've always had support. Um, I went to, good schools, and I've had the luxury of that education. Um, so I always wondered, what am I doing here? Why do I get to make these calls about these important issues? And I wanted to examine that. And I thought
Mm,
about the things that I learned from clients, and I started writing. I wrote one chapter about this one experience with a client that was really important. And then I wrote chapter after chapter, and I realized, like, all of the experiences taught me something. And I was kind of just along for the ride. And I happened to have the map. I was holding the map, and my clients weren't. And that's the only difference. And so to be able to navigate these things with my clients really taught me a lot. And I didn't always win. That's another thing that I had to really accept, which is that more important than winning or losing was that you stand beside somebody and allow them to express their human dignity. That's what our legal process should be about, is everyone should get a chance to be heard. And it doesn't mean you're right, or it doesn't mean you're going to win. But if you don't even get that chance to be heard, then the whole system is meaningless. And that's really what I learned about a lot of the work that I've done. Is some of the most impactful cases were ones I didn't win. And I heard from my clients that what mattered wasn't the win, but the experience and the trust, and the fact that I was there to listen to somebody as they were going through something that was really difficult. So I think it was really important for me to be able to express that. And it's a book that I think a lot of people who are entering the legal practice, particularly housing, might benefit from, just to understand what it's like to be in a court like that, high volume, high pressure, and to feel, these normal feelings of privilege, of being an outsider, of making calls that you have no right to make, making decisions um, only because you were lucky in some way at some point in your life.
So if I wanted to buy that book, is it on Amazon, or like where
It
where?
is on Amazon, yeah.
Yeah,
I could tell you about the publishing a book world. Um,
that's probably a
and
whole other
so
interview.
a whole
Yeah,
other interview. So it ended up on Amazon,
yeah,
and I self-published it because I was just sick of waiting for my agent and various publishers to figure out what the market for this is.
right,
The entire book industry is about what's the market? How many followers do you have on Instagram?
right.
Can you throw in a cat calendar with this or something like that? Um, and there have been some great books like Evicted on the same subject by Matt Desmond. And so there, was this feeling that that market's already been covered. Like, oh yeah, somebody already wrote a book about housing.
Oh, yeah.
I
Well, for all of you listening and watching, Sheltered 20 Years in Housing Court, check it out.
appreciate
Um,
it. Thank you.
um, wow. So like, I, I mean, I love what I'm hearing from you is like all of these different experiences, and you're really taking it to heart. You're really choosing that path because you believe in it. It sounds like everything that you've chosen, it's because you have a deep belief in that, that path, and learning from it, and that you actually do take lessons learned from it. Do you, not to put you on the spot, but is there a story from housing, like the 20 years, that comes to mind as something like where you just mentioned that somebody was thankful for having their day in court, regardless of what the outcome was. Is there one of those
Yeah,
that comes to mind?
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a family I represented, a woman who was a housekeeper and worked for a wealthy family in the suburbs, and she had a 16-year-old daughter who had lupus. And they lived in this apartment in Greenpoint, which is a gentrifying neighborhood in Brooklyn.
Mm,
Today, it's probably totally unrecognizable from what it was like 20 years ago when I represented this family. Now it's all bars and tattoo parlors and restaurants, and it's hipster city. Back then, it was a immigrant community and a largely Polish community. And so this Polish landlord owned the building, and this woman and her daughter lived in one of the apartments. And there is a law that says that a landlord can take back an apartment at the end of the lease to occupy it for their family. And so this landlord said he wanted to house his parents in the apartment. And so he wanted to evict my client and her daughter. And a lot of times when landlords say that, it's a pretext. They just want to get rid of the tenant who's there. And then when no one's looking, rent it out to somebody who's going to pay, you know, 3, 4, 5 times more. And no one's going to look because they're gone. They've been evicted. And
yeah.
so that's what I thought was going on here. And so we had a trial and we prepared for months and months, and my client testified, and I got to cross-examine the landlord about how, he wanted to have parties in this basement for him and his buddies. That's really the purpose, and then rent it out later for more money. That his parents lived somewhere else in a decent apartment, that it wasn't feasible that they would come here, that their medical care and their community was elsewhere. And the judge, said, I hear what you're saying, but the law is what the law is, and it says the landlord has a right, and I don't have to look into all this other stuff. And so your clients are going to be evicted, but I'll give them 6 months. So it's kind of devastating. And I had to, explain this to my client who spoke little English, and her daughter helped translate. And then later on, they had to move out, and I got a letter from the client and her through her daughter, and the daughter said, I got into Columbia University, and I'll never forget the way that you treated my mom in her, darkest time when she thought we were going to be on the streets, and she was worried about my illness. And even though we lost, one day I want to be a lawyer like you, who like fights for people like us. And by the way, my mother's employer passed away and left her a bunch of money in her will because she'd been her loyal housekeeper for so many decades. And we're using that to buy a co-op in Queens, and we're going to live
Wow.
there. And so the story worked out, not because of anything I did, it just worked out. But the impact I had, or, I didn't even know I had, but the impact that this young woman conveyed to me was more important than any win I could have gotten in trial, right? In that case. So that stuck with me. It's about human dignity. That's what counts when you're standing up for somebody in a situation like this. Is everyone has that right to have human dignity. And what's really sad about the world, um, quite often, is that people are deprived of that dignity. Uh, they aren't. They don't feel like they're respected, and that matters a lot. It matters a lot between people, and it matters a lot for a society that we have a system in which people are respected.
100%. And I'm so glad that you were able to do that for them. That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah,
Taking that a step forward, now that we have, and so let's jump into AI and that, because when I met you, first you were at Just Fix, I think, and
that's right.
that was like, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but like your initial exposure to using like technology,
That's right.
yeah, to help with the housing problem, and then more recently, though, like working with generative AI to help. And so, if you could talk a little bit about that, I know that you've been working on Roxanne, and also like this probably would go into AI University and things like that that you've also been working on. You've been very busy lately. Uh,
Yeah, not as busy as you, but
so,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
tell
I
us
mean,
about that.
I so during the pandemic, I also thought, like, what's the next step? I want to take a bold step because, there could be another pandemic. The world could literally end. That's how it felt in those dark
Mm,
days. So I wanted to be bold. I wanted to do something like risky and really step out of my comfort zone, because the job I had, I could have had that job for the rest of my life and probably not learned a heck of a lot more than I had already learned in the 9.5 years doing it. Um, and so I thought, okay, let me join a tech company that does like adjacent work and jump right in. But that's a lot harder than you might imagine. And you would know firsthand, running a company um, that is a nonprofit, especially a tech company that's a nonprofit, is extremely challenging. But because of that experience, I was introduced to people like you and others who were like, oh, yeah, what we're doing now is interesting, but just wait until you see this new stuff that's coming. And not even, not a lot of people know about it yet, but here's how it works. And that's when I saw things like ragbots, like LawDroid, and realized um, this is the future. This is the way lawyers are going to work. This is the way that information is going to be conveyed to people in a way that they can accept it, the way that they can manage it and understand it. And once that happens, what is the work of lawyers going to look like? Because if all lawyers are doing is serving as translators for law into ordinary speak, then these machines can do that. So what is the purpose of lawyers? And that's what kind of got me really thinking about um, what could be done. And particularly in the area that I spent 20 years working on, housing, it's just a bunch of rules and regulations. It's things like this is how hot your apartment should be in the winter. This is what your front door should look like. This is how your trash should be disposed of so you don't have rats and roaches. It's just a bunch of rules. And to be able to tell people like these are the rules and this is how your landlord should follow the rules and this is what you should do if they don't follow the rules, it seems so straightforward and simple that I started to kind of work on building a ragbot, which is, as you know, retrieval augmented generation, converting a knowledge base into some kind of like interface that gives people actionable help. And it took a year, even though building the bot itself took a few minutes. Getting an organization to host the bot, testing it, getting people to buy in, all that took a long time. And I worked with a company called Joseph that provided the technology. And we launched the bot. We were going to call it Repairosaurus Rex. But then, one of the
By
parts
the way,
of
that's an
yeah,
awesome name. Love that.
yeah, I love the name. We had a little dinosaur as a icon, with a little tool belt holding a wrench. But
Yeah.
one of the things we learned when we asked our host organization about the word Rex is that it's a colonial term meaning king, and it can have very negative connotations for a lot of people. And so immediately we said, okay, that can't be it then. Like that's going to turn people off.
Mm.
Um, and so they came up with the name Roxanne, which is also cute. And so we call it Roxanne AI, and it launched on January 7th. And it's helped a couple of thousand people already without any marketing or advertising, kind of get basic help. And there's this term that I'm trying to coin, and you can help as well. There is this barrier to this stuff called unauthorized practice of law, and it draws a distinction between legal advice and legal information. But as when they wrote these laws, they couldn't have imagined AI and what it could do. This was made for lay people who didn't go to law school, who might be providing dangerously bad information to people, right? That makes sense. But with AI, there's no risk of that. You're training the models on the best, most up-to-date information. So I'm calling it now actionable legal information. So it threads the line. It's an even finer line between advice and information. Yeah, it's still information, but it's actionable and it's specific. And we may face a challenge at some point, but for now, I think it's serving a lot of people. And that's really what counts to me, is that people who can't get help, people who don't have time to wait for hours to see a real lawyer, people who are waiting on the phone for hours to talk to an operator who can give them the same information or sometimes less good information. Um, I think this addresses that problem, and it really, to me, is just an example. It's just like the kind of the opening chapter in the story of what RAG bots can do. And I know you've worked on Leah in North Carolina, and other bots, which can really open up this world of information, legal information. It can really democratize access to this type of information and help us uphold the maximum of equal access to justice that we've never really come close to meeting. And 92% of the civil legal problems in America go unaddressed every year. So we're getting even further away from solutions. And we can't just think we're going to throw more lawyers at the problem. There will never be enough lawyers who will do the work needed and get all of these problems addressed. So to me, AI was an answer to that. And so I've been spending the last year or so figuring out ways to make these AI tools available to people who have very practical everyday problems. And also the legal organizations that have very practical problems. Like, how do they deal with intake? How do they deal with triage? How do they manage paperwork and forms and filings? These are all things that take up so much time, and they don't actually really help anybody. They're just process-oriented tasks that take up a lot of time and energy. So I think AI is the solution to that, and I'm never going back. I think this is my next thing.
Well, obviously you're speaking, preaching to the choir here. 100% believe the same thing. And we actually just, recently saw each other in DC. We were on the same panel. Um, Sam was there from Joseph Legal, and Joseph Legal, they're doing amazing work too, on this. And with Roxanne, it's a great product. There's so much market that I think that all of us can contribute to, narrowing that gap, and that, yeah, this is the way to scale things up. There's still going to be room for everyone, and I'm looking forward to a future where everyone can benefit from this.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah.
one, like a next step from that though, that I want to ask you about is like, and I love it, like everything you do is like practicing what you preach, and like, so the next step is with AI University, which I believe is in coordination with Just Tech, that to educate people about what these things are, how they work, and then how, hopefully, by becoming more familiar with it, they'll employ it and make use of it. So tell us a little bit about what AI University is about.
Yeah. And a little bit of an aside about LinkedIn, which for 15 or 20 years, I thought was just like Facebook for nerds, and I did not engage at all. I didn't even understand the point of it. A couple of years ago, I thought, okay, let me see if there's a community of people who's talking about this type of thing, AI and access to justice. Turns out there was a very small community. And I started reading the posts and then slowly engaging and then injecting my own ideas. And a year or two later, people started reaching out to me and asking me if I wanted to come to conferences and talk about these things. And then I got some job offers. And one of the job offers was to work at this company called Just Tech, which is a really interesting company that provides kind of tech support for legal nonprofits. They kind of bridge the gap when a small nonprofit legal services organization, let's say in upstate New York, wants to build a new case management software. Well, who's going to help them, and how much is it going to cost? Well, Just Tech was created to fill that gap, and it's made up of a lot of former legal services attorneys. So they asked me to join um, to talk about AI because I'd been talking about AI on LinkedIn, and and so I joined them, and we're trying to build, things that help people access AI. And one of them is called AI University. So I helped
Mm.
design this course, basically like a semester long, graduate level course on the nuts and bolts of AI. And I know you teach a course like this at Suffolk Law School. And it's really interesting that we're doing this because it's so necessary to make sure people have the right information about AI. They just don't think about hallucinations and made up cases and liability, but they think about all the good things that can come of these tools if they use them properly. And so AI University is for all of the IOLA grantees in New York State, the Interest on Lawyer Account Fund for New York, um, And we created this kind of 6-month program to teach people everything about AI and even include labs in which they can build AI bots. They can build RAG bots. And we're building RAG bots on books that are found on Project Gutenberg. So they're in the public domain. And so people have created little reading buddies based on their favorite books. We've got a lot of Pride and Prejudice reading buddies, some great Gatsby, some Moby Dick, classics. And people have done really interesting things. They've turned all the characters in the Great Gatsby into cats. They've rewritten the ending of Moby Dick, in which the whale dies and everybody on the Pequod lives. They've created haikus and sonnets about Pride and Prejudice. And the point of all this is to show what's possible using these bots and to get people thinking about legal applications that can help them work more efficiently and help more people. And so really excited about like where that's headed. But one thing that I think is a point worth making, and this well, is law schools need to get on this wagon quickly. They need to start teaching students about AI, because law students right now who don't know how to use AI are going to be left out of the job market when they graduate. And that's really sad. The way lawyers are going to work, probably even in a year, it's going to be intensively using AI. And we need to make sure law students are ready for that world, or they're going to be obsolete. And these kinds of programs, like your class at Suffolk and AI University, and there's a similar program in Illinois, we need more of this stuff. We need to save the legal profession. Otherwise, the dinosaurs are that are running it are going to get hit by the asteroid, and it's going to be over.
Yeah. I'm actually, I take heart in the fact that there's a lot of law schools now that have similar programs.
Yeah.
I believe one, I can't remember the name of it right now, I actually made it mandatory that you have to take
Yeah.
a course.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. So, I think just the pressure of it being out there and so ubiquitous is causing law schools to focus on it. But yeah, the more the merrier.
Yeah.
So in the time we have left, there's always a couple of questions that I like to ask my guests. The first one is, and I think it's totally appropriate, I'm sure you have a great response for this, is you have so much going on. Like there's so many things that you're juggling, including the AI university, including being an adjunct professor, including like working at Just Tech and and we're with Joseph Legal, like all of these things together. How do you manage to do it? Because I know that people that are watching and listening have a lot themselves. And so any tips that you would have would be great.
Yeah. I mean, number one tip, maybe it's the only tip, is if I don't like it, I can't do it. And so time is fungible to me if I like what I'm doing. And I think that's true for a lot of people. But, if I had one really simple job, but I hated it, I'd probably not do it well. And it would probably take me a long time to do it. And I'd be stuck. But right now, I feel really motivated by everything that's happening in this space. And I try to link it all together, like it's all connected to me in my brain. It's all about this larger purpose of bringing these tech tools to solving this crisis that we have in access to justice. And I think of it that way in my mind. And so all of my efforts are going towards that same goal. And so
Mm.
it doesn't even seem like work sometimes. I'm writing another book called The Augmented Lawyer, The Future of Legal Practice. And I want to incorporate a lot of the ideas about, how AI is going to change legal practice, how the billable hour is going to be obsolete, what law students need to learn now in order to be successful as lawyers in the near future, and so on. And so hopefully I can get that done in the next 6 months or so. But to answer your question, like it's so interesting to me. I feel lucky to be in this moment where these huge things are happening, and so it doesn't even feel like work.
I think that's a great answer. When you do what you love, it doesn't feel like work.
Yeah.
Um, and then the last one is at the end of the day, what makes it all worthwhile? You're doing all this stuff. I think that story you told is probably one that makes it feel worthwhile. But like for you, like what makes you feel good about it, the whole experience?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's good days and bad days, and sometimes you think it doesn't it's not worthwhile, or nothing's changing, or it's just extremely frustrating. But if you can have enough good moments, I'm a stoic, that's my philosophy. So I try not to ride the roller coaster of like success and failure. And, basically, I don't take credit for the successes, but I also don't blame myself excessively for the failures. I'm just along for the ride, and there's going to be ups and downs. And that's a really helpful way to look at things, because uh, it's stable and
Mm.
you can ride it out. And so that's the way I like to look at the world. And especially in the law, there's so many things you can't control, no matter how hard you work, how good your ideas are. Things go badly, things are out of your control. And so to maintain that balance, I think, is a real challenge. It's not easy to do that. Sometimes you take away a little bit of the joy that you might feel because you don't want to like give yourself too much credit. But then you can really be prepared for the downs too, and say, hey, that just happens. I'm not going to beat myself up over it, and just get through it day by day.
This might cut against your stoicism, but I think you're doing an amazing job
I
and
appreciate it.
kind of, improving a lot of people's lives. So
Well, it's
good on
great
you.
to have role models like you. And I still remember that day we met in that little cafe in Brooklyn. Seems like, a million years ago, but you really looked out for me from that day forward. So I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Satish. Um, well, with that, for people that are listening and watching, how can they keep in touch with you?
Well, as I mentioned, I'm on LinkedIn. I also have a Substack that I'm trying to write called The Augmented Lawyer, which dovetails nicely with the book. And I can be reached at snori@justtech.com or sn352@nyu.edu. But I'm easy to find. Please reach out. Reach out if you have any questions or any issues you'd like to discuss.
Well, awesome. And thank you so much for being on my show. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Tom.
And for all of you, thank you so much for watching.
Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to LawDroid Manifesto and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.